There is a road you travel every single day. Maybe it's the highway you take to work, the hallway at your office, the neighborhood street you've walked 100 times. You know every turn, every landmark. You've grown comfortable on it. And because you've grown comfortable, you've stopped seeing what's actually there. The broken people, the quiet desperation, the ones who are bleeding out slowly right in front of you, and nobody is stopping. Nobody is even slowing down. Jesus told a story about a road just like that, and the reason it has survived 2,000 years and still lands like a fist in the chest of every person who truly hears, it is because the road he described is not ancient history. It is your morning commute. It is your Instagram feed. It is the hallway outside your office, the pew next to yours, the neighborhood you drive through every single day without ever really seeing who is on it. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was known in the ancient world by a name that tells you everything you need to know about it. They called it the Way of Blood. Not poetically, literally. It descended 27 kilometers through the harshest terrain in the Judean wilderness, dropping from 800 meters above sea level to 250 meters below it in a series of sharp cliffs, narrow passes, and blind corners, perfectly designed to conceal anyone who did not want to be seen. Robbers knew this road well. They used its geography the way a predator uses tall grass to wait, to watch, and to strike at the moment when their target was most exposed and most alone. Traveling this road alone was not carelessness. It was considered a form of courage bordering on recklessness. A man made that journey. The Bible does not give him a name. It does not tell us his profession, his family, his history, or whether he was a good man or a difficult one. He is simply a man on a road traveling alone. And somewhere between Jerusalem and Jericho, the robbers found him. They stripped him of everything he carried. They beat him. The Greek word used suggests they beat him to the edge of death, leaving him half-conscious in the dirt. And then they disappeared back into the rocks and left him there, alone, on the road, unable to help himself, unable to move, entirely dependent on whoever might pass by next. Now stop here for a moment, because this is the image Jesus placed at the center of his story, and he placed it here intentionally. A man, completely stripped, completely exposed, completely dependent on the mercy of strangers. All the things that normally define a person in society, their possessions, their clothing, their ability to move and act and speak for themselves, all of it was gone. What remained was the most fundamental, irreducible thing a human being in desperate need of another human being. Nothing more and nothing less. This is the condition that God designed the story to force us to confront, not the abstract, comfortable, manageable version of human need, the kind you can address from a safe distance with a financial donation or a social media post, the raw, immediate, inconvenient, unavoidable version. A body in the road, a face in the dirt, a hand reaching toward empty air with no guarantee that anyone is going to take it. The robbers in this story are easy to identify as the villains. And yes, they are. Their violence was real, their cruelty was deliberate, and the suffering they produced was severe. But Jesus did not tell this story to talk about robbers. He told it to talk about passers-by, because the moment the robbers disappeared into the rocks, the robbery was over. What happened next, what the next people on the road decided to do with what they found, that is where the real story begins. Here is the thing about the Jericho road that makes it impossible to keep at a comfortable historical distance. Every single day, in the life of every person watching this, there are people on the road. Not metaphorically, actually. The colleague who hasn't spoken in weeks, but used to be the loudest person in the room. The neighbor whose lights have been off at unusual hours. The family member who keeps saying, "I'm fine," in a voice that means the exact opposite. The person at your church who comes every Sunday and leaves every Sunday without anyone asking them how they actually are. the person sleeping in a doorway you drive past on the way to your morning coffee. We have built an extraordinary infrastructure for not seeing these people. We have schedules and earbuds and phone screens and the entirely legitimate busyness of lives that genuinely do demand our attention. We are not cruel people. Most of us, if pressed, would say we care deeply about human suffering. We follow the news. We share the posts. We feel the feelings, briefly, before the algorithm moves us along to the next thing. And we tell ourselves that what we feel counts for something. That awareness is a form of action. That seeing is the same as stopping. Jesus told a story that says otherwise. Seeing is not stopping. Feeling is not helping. Awareness is not love. And the road from Jerusalem to Jericho is littered with people who saw and kept walking. What Jesus is doing at the very beginning of this parable is setting up a picture of need that is so raw, so complete, and so urgent that the only legitimate question is not, should someone help, but who will actually stop? The need is not ambiguous. The man is not possibly fine. He is not someone you can reasonably tell yourself might not want the intrusion. He is half dead in the road, and the question on the table is painfully, uncomfortably simple. Are you going to be someone who stops? Because that question, it turns out, is far more complicated than it appears. As we will see in the next chapter, the first person who came down that road was not a bad person by any outward measurement. He was one of the most respected figures in his society. He was a man of God. He was a man who knew the scriptures and served in the house of the Lord, and had given his life to religious practice and holy living. He was, by every external indicator, exactly the kind of person you would expect to stop. And he didn't. And the reason he gave himself the internal justification that let him walk past a half-dead man in the road and still consider himself a righteous person is the most convicting part of the entire story, because you have used it too. So have I. The road is real. The wounded man is real. And the question is already forming before the priest ever comes into view. What are you going to do when you see him? He came down the road with clean hands and clean robes and a schedule that mattered. He was a priest, a man whose entire life had been constructed around the service of God. He knew the law better than most people in the country. He had spent years in the study and practice of what it meant to be holy, to be set apart, to represent the divine in the midst of a people who desperately needed that representation. By every external measure, if you had to choose one person in all of Israel most likely to stop for a suffering stranger, this was your man. Religion, education, moral formation, a lifetime of service. And yet the Bible says something devastating in 4 very short words. He passed by on the other side. He didn't not see the man. The text is explicit about this. He saw him. He was aware. And then, with full awareness of the suffering in front of him, he made a decision. He crossed to the other side of the road and kept walking. He chose the other side deliberately, putting maximum physical distance between himself and the need, as if the act of not being adjacent to the suffering somehow reduced his moral responsibility for it. Now, we have to be honest about something here, because the priest almost certainly had reasons, good reasons by the standards of his world. If he touched a dead body, or even a man who appeared to be dead, he would be rendered ceremonially unclean. Unclean meant unable to serve in the temple, unable to fulfill the religious duties that were his professional and spiritual calling. He was possibly on his way to Jerusalem to perform sacred rites. He may have told himself that the spiritual service of many was more important than the immediate need of one. He may have reasoned that someone else would come along. He may have thought, very practically, that the robbers were still nearby and stopping would put him in danger. He had, in other words, an entire internal legal brief prepared before he ever reached the man in the road. a fully constructed argument for why crossing to the other side was not just acceptable, but arguably responsible. This is the part that should make every Christian in America deeply uncomfortable, because the priest's reasoning was not the reasoning of a callous person. It was the reasoning of a busy, responsible, committed religious professional who had genuinely convinced himself that his calling excused him from this particular interruption. And if we are honest, truly honest, we recognize that reasoning immediately because we use it constantly. We are busy with the work of God. We have commitments, ministries, small groups, sermon preparation, volunteer coordination. We have spiritual reasons for our busyness that feel entirely different from secular busyness. It's not that we're chasing money or entertainment, we're serving the Lord. Surely that matters. Surely the Lord understands that we cannot stop for every person in every road when there is so much important work to do. Surely the priest had a point. Jesus told this story to a lawyer who was looking for the outer limit of his obligation to love his neighbor. The lawyer wanted to know the minimum, who exactly counts as my neighbor, so I know precisely when my obligation begins and ends. And Jesus gave him a story in which the most religious man in the culture, the man with the best theological education and the most sacred professional obligations, used those very things as the reason to walk past a dying human being. He used God work to justify the abandonment of a man made in the image of God. That is not a small theological point. It is a demolition of the idea that religious activity is a substitute for human love, that the forms of worship, the rituals, the services, the professional ministry obligations, the theological precision, the ceremonial correctness can coexist peacefully with the active choice to ignore the suffering person right in front of you. Jesus is saying, through this story, they cannot. The priest chose his religion over the man in the road, and in doing so, he failed both. Think about what this looks like in the modern American church context. The Sunday morning service is extraordinary. The worship is powerful. The theology is sound. The programs are running. The staff is professional. The budget is responsible. And sitting in the parking lot on the way out, there is a person in obvious distress. Obvious to anyone who slows down enough to see it. But we have lunch plans. We have somewhere to be. We gave in the offering. We said the prayer. We fulfilled the religious obligation. And we passed by on the other side. There is a phrase that has become something of a cultural shorthand in America for exactly this dynamic. Thoughts and prayers. It is not meant to be cruel. The people who offer it often mean it sincerely in the moment they say it. But it has come to represent a pattern of religious response to human suffering that checks the box of acknowledgement without engaging with the actual need. I saw you. I felt something. I said something spiritual about it, and I kept walking. The priest would have recognized it immediately. It is the ancient, unbroken tradition of using the language of God to justify the abandonment of the people of God. Jesus is not asking us to be less religious. He is asking us to be actually religious, to let the God we worship and the scriptures we study and the services we attend produce in us the kind of love that stops on the road, a love that is willing to be inconvenienced, dirtied, delayed, and interrupted. A love that does not calculate its ritual purity before kneeling in the dust beside a broken person. A love that understands that the temple service can wait, but the man half dead in the road cannot. The priest walked past. Clean hands, clean robes, clean conscience, constructed of theological justifications, stacked carefully enough to block out the sight of a face in the dirt. And 2,000 years later, his footsteps on the other side of that road sound uncomfortably like the sound of our own. He came closer than the priest did. That's the detail Luke includes. Almost as a precise moral notation, the Levite came to the place and saw him. Some translations add that he came and looked. He didn't just register the presence of the suffering man from a distance and reroute around him the way the priest had done. He actually moved toward him. He stopped, or nearly stopped. He looked at the situation closely enough to have a clear picture of what was happening, and then he too passed by on the other side. There is something in this sequence, the almost, the looking, the turning away anyway, that is more disturbing in a different way than the priest's passing. The priest's response could at least be explained by distance, by the rerouting before full engagement. But the Levite engaged. He got close enough to see the details. He made the choice after information, not in ignorance. He knew exactly what he was walking away from, and he walked away anyway. Scholars of this text have noted that the Levite may have seen the priest ahead of him on the road, may have noticed that the most senior religious authority in his world had passed without stopping. And there is a specific human psychology at work in that observation. When a person of authority and moral standing does a thing, it silently signals to everyone behind them that the thing is permissible. The priest's passing did not just represent his own individual moral failure. It created a precedent. It normalized the response. By the time the Levite arrived, there was already a data point suggesting that the correct, respectable, professionally appropriate action was to keep moving. This is the psychology of the bystander effect, one of the most thoroughly documented phenomena in social science, playing out in ancient scripture with uncanny precision. The bystander effect tells us that the more people who witness a situation of need without responding, the less likely any individual is to respond. We look to others for cues about what a situation requires. When others are not acting, we interpret their inaction as information. Maybe it's not as serious as it looks. Maybe someone else is handling it. Maybe the social contract here is different from what I assumed. The Levite looked at the priest's decision and saw permission. And this is one of the most practically dangerous patterns in modern Christian community. We look at each other constantly for cues about what our faith requires of us. And when the people around us, the respected leaders, the long-standing members, the ones who seem to have it together spiritually when they are not stopping, we absorb that as a kind of communal permission. The standard adjusts downward to match the practice. What everyone is doing becomes, by default, what the community considers acceptable. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the bar for what counts as loving your neighbor drops until it barely requires stopping at all. Think about the categories of compassion we have convinced ourselves count as stopping. The Facebook share, the prayer request added to the list, the emoji response to the message about someone's crisis, the forwarded article about a social issue, the donation made to an organization that will handle the actual proximity so we don't have to. None of these things are worthless, but none of them are kneeling in the dust beside a bleeding human being either. The Levite stopped long enough to look and then decided that looking was sufficient. We have built an entire digital culture around the idea that witnessing is the same as engaging, that being informed about suffering is morally equivalent to addressing it. There is something particularly tragic about the Levite's almost stop, because in that moment when he came close and looked, something in him responded. There was a pulse of conscience, a flicker of recognition, an awareness that what was in front of him required something. He was not a sociopath. He had a conscience. He had compassion, at least in the form of a feeling, at least briefly. He almost, that word contains worlds, almost stopped, almost helped, almost let the compassion he clearly felt translate into the action it was pointing toward. And then something else won. Fear, perhaps. Calculation. The awareness of the priest's precedent. The sense that this was not his particular responsibility. The knowledge of how long it would take and how much it would cost and how uncertain the outcome would be. Something in the mathematics of the moment came out against stopping. And the almost became a passing. Here is the hard truth this chapter is asking every one of us to examine almost is not enough. Almost compassion is not the same as compassion. Almost stopping is not the same as stopping. The man in the road does not benefit from the Levite's brief moment of feeling. He is not helped by the conscience that flickered and was suppressed. He lies there just as alone, just as damaged, just as close to death after the Levite passes as he was before. The inner experience of the Levite is entirely invisible to the man in the road. What reaches him is only the footsteps on the far side, only the absence. We live in a culture that has become extraordinarily good at the performance of compassion, at the public expression of feeling that can be measured, liked, shared, and validated. We have mistaken the performance for the thing itself. We have confused the emotion with the action, the acknowledgement with the engagement. The Levite felt something real, and the man in the road was still alone when he left. Jesus is telling us, with the specific detail of the Levite's approach and retreat, feeling it is not doing it. Good intentions that don't become action are simply intentions. And the road is full of people who need more than our intentions. And then a Samaritan came down the road. And when Jesus said those words, the crowd listening to him would have reacted with an emotion that is difficult to fully translate into modern terms. Something between shock, offense, and the specific discomfort of having your assumptions shattered in public. Because Samaritans were not simply outsiders in the Jewish world of Jesus' day. They were the specific category of outsider that occupied the deepest pocket of cultural contempt. They were neighbors who had become enemies, people of shared heritage who had diverged into mutual hostility across generations of religious dispute, ethnic tension, and historical grievance. Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. The Gospel of John mentions this as a straightforward social fact. Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. If Jesus were telling this story to a modern American audience, the identity of the hero would need to be calibrated to produce the same reaction. Not just any stranger, the specific stranger whose presence in the hero role feels most uncomfortable to the people hearing the story. The person from the political party you trust least. The person whose social media you have muted. The person whose neighborhood you avoid. The person about whom you carry a quiet, unexamined, entirely respectable prejudice that you have never had to confront directly because your worlds have never quite collided. Jesus chose the Samaritan with surgical intentionality. He wanted the audience to feel the discomfort of their own assumptions being weaponized against them. He wanted the sting of recognizing that the person you have written off might be the one most accurately reflecting the heart of God. He came where the man was. He saw him, and he had compassion. The Greek word used here is splagnizomai, a word that refers not to a surface emotion, but to a visceral, gut-level response. It is the same word used to describe how Jesus felt when he saw the crowds like sheep without a shepherd. It is a word about being moved at the deepest level of your being, in a place below. Thought and calculation, in the place where your humanity is most fundamentally awake. The Samaritan did not decide to have compassion. He was seized by it, and then he acted on it. He went to, not across the road to him, directly to him. He crossed whatever social, cultural, and ethnic barriers the geography of that road represented. He got down into the dust where the man was lying. He did not ask for the man's name or religion or political affiliation or whether he was the kind of person who deserved the help of a Samaritan. The man was there. He was suffering. The Samaritan had what was needed. That was the entire calculation. And this is where the story becomes most radical in its application to modern American Christianity. Because the church in America has become, in many ways, extraordinarily good at loving people who are like us. We are warm and generous and attentive within our communities, our churches, our neighborhoods, our social circles, our political tribes. We have built rich, supportive, loving communities within the boundaries of shared identity. that is genuinely good and genuinely beautiful. But Jesus did not tell this story to affirm the love we already know how to do. He told it to explode our definition of who gets included in it. The Samaritan stopped for a Jewish man, a man from the community that regarded him as religiously inferior, ethnically compromised, culturally unacceptable. A man who, if the positions were reversed, might very well have walked past him. The Samaritan's compassion was not contingent on whether the Jewish man deserved it, had earned it, would have reciprocated it, or shared any common ground that might make the investment feel safe. The compassion was not calculated. It was not strategic. It was not offered in expectation of relationship or gratitude or any return at all. It was offered because there was a human being in the road who needed it, and the Samaritan happened to be the one who came along. Jesus chose this man as his hero because love that only moves toward the familiar, the likable, the politically aligned, the culturally comfortable, is not actually love in the sense he means. It is affinity. It is tribal loyalty. It is the normal, instinctive, non-supernatural relational warmth that every human culture produces without any divine input whatsoever. What Jesus is calling his people to, what the Samaritan models in this story, is something categorically different. It is the love that crosses the road toward the person it has been taught to avoid. The love that kneels in the dirt beside someone who represents everything it was raised to distrust. The love that does not first ask whether the recipient is worthy or safe or from the right group, but simply asks, is there a person here who needs what I have to give? The priest had the theology. The Levite had the association. The Samaritan had the love. And Jesus made very sure that his audience understood exactly which of those three things actually helped the man in the road. He stopped. One word, one decision, one moment where everything about this story hinges. The priest saw and kept walking. The Levite looked and kept walking. The Samaritan saw and stopped. And that single, unremarkable physical act, the stopping of a man's forward motion on a road, is the fulcrum on which Jesus has balanced his entire definition of love in this parable. Not a feeling, not a theology, not a doctrinal position or a political stance or a carefully composed social media reflection on human suffering. A stopped body, a man who was going somewhere, had a schedule, had his own concerns and his own destination, and chose, in one specific moment, to be somewhere else instead. We have complicated love enormously. We have written books about it, preached sermon series on it, built entire theological frameworks around its various forms and expressions. We debate agape versus phileo. We discuss the 5 love languages. We construct careful arguments about what love requires in various contexts. And all of that has its place. But Jesus, in this story, reduced love to something almost embarrassingly simple. You see someone who needs help, and you stop. Not you feel something, not you pray something, not you post something. You stop. Your body is in a different place than it was going to be because of what you saw on the road. Everything the Samaritan did after the stopping flows from the stopping. He went to him. The stopping made proximity possible. He bound his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. The stopping made the treatment possible. He set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The stopping initiated a chain of actions that continued long after the initial moment of decision. Every single thing that saved this man's life was made possible by one prior act. A person who was going somewhere, choosing to be here instead. Oil and wine in the ancient world were the standard medical treatments of the time. Oil to soothe and protect, wine to cleanse and disinfect. The Samaritan had both. They were his. He was using them up on a stranger. The tearing of clothing to make bandages, that is material cost, immediate and unrecoverable. the use of his own animal, which meant he walked while an injured man rode. That is, physical cost, tangible and sustained. The commitment to the inn and the care overnight, that is, time cost, unexpected and open-ended. None of these were small. None of them were free. Every resource the Samaritan brought to this situation was a resource he had planned to use for something else that he redirected without apparent resentment or calculation. Here is what love actually costs when it is real. It costs the thing you were planning to do with that time. It costs the clean clothes you were planning to keep clean. It costs the money you were planning to spend on yourself. It costs the comfortable trajectory of your day, your week, your plans. It asks you to kneel in dust you did not come to this road to kneel in, to touch wounds you did not cause and did not choose, to bear a weight that was not yours and become responsible for an outcome that is entirely uncertain. And it asks all of this in a moment, not after careful deliberation, not after the logistics have been worked out, not after you've confirmed that the cost is within your acceptable range. Right now, while the man is still in the road, while your original destination is still waiting, while every rational voice in your head is generating a very reasonable argument for continuing on your way. The stopping is the love. Everything else is the expression of it. But without the stopping, there is no expression. Without the stopping, there is only a man in the road and a story about 3 people who each had a reason to keep walking, and 2 of them used it. In modern American culture, we are extraordinarily busy, genuinely, legitimately busy, in ways that our grandparents were not. The demands on our time and attention are unprecedented. The pressure to produce, perform, achieve, and optimize is woven into the fabric of daily life at every level. We are not pretending to be busy. We are busy, and that busyness is real, and it matters, and it has to be taken seriously. But Jesus is asking us to make space within that busyness, not to eliminate the busyness, but to interrupt it, to build into the architecture of our rushing lives the capacity to actually stop when a human being is in the road in front of us, to treat the interruption not as a disruption of our real life, but as the most real moment in our day. The Samaritan had somewhere to be. He stopped anyway, and the man who was half dead in the road was alive because of it. The next morning, the Samaritan left. He had spent the night at the inn, caring for the wounded man through the hours when his condition was most uncertain, staying present through the discomfort and the mess and the demands of someone else's crisis. And when morning came, he had to return to the road and to whatever business had originally brought him this way. But before he left, he did something that separates this story from a simple account of roadside first aid and turns it into a theological statement about the nature of love. He took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 2 denarii represented roughly 2 days of wages for an ordinary laborer, a meaningful sum, not a trivial gesture. And then he said something that the innkeeper must have found unusual. Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Not, here is what I can afford. Not, here is my maximum contribution. Not, I'll do my part and you figure out the rest. Whatever more you spend, I will repay. An open-ended financial commitment to a complete stranger with no cap, no ceiling, no guarantee of reimbursement, no contract of any kind beyond the word of a man who had business to finish and a road to return to. This is the detail in the story that most directly confronts the way Americans tend to structure our compassion. We are remarkably comfortable with bounded generosity, the donation that fits within the budget, the commitment that has a clear end point, the involvement that doesn't threaten to become indefinitely expensive or demanding. We give what we can afford to give, we commit to what we can manage without disrupting our lives, and we feel genuinely good about the contribution we've made. There is nothing wrong with this as a baseline. But the Samaritan did not structure his compassion with an exit strategy. He did not come to the inn with a predetermined limit. He came with an open hand and a promise to come back. There is a theological truth embedded in the structure of that promise that goes beyond the specific financial transaction. The Samaritan's commitment to whatever more it takes communicates something profound about the nature of love that goes the distance. It says that the person you have started to care for is worth more than your current capacity to quantify, that their recovery, their well-being, their future is not reducible to what you calculated you could afford in the first moment of response. That love, once genuinely extended, does not look for the exit. It looks for what is still needed and finds a way to provide it. This is the difference between compassion as an event and compassion as a posture. An event has a beginning and an end. You respond to the crisis. You provide what you can in the moment. You move on. This is valuable and often entirely appropriate. But a posture is different. A posture says, I have entered into a relationship of responsibility with this person's well-being, and that relationship persists beyond the moment of my initial response. I will come back. I will check. I will honor the commitment I made when I could not know how much it would ultimately cost me. Jesus placed this specific financial detail in the parable for a reason. He wanted his listeners, particularly the religious expert who was looking for the outer limit of his obligation, to understand that love as he defines it does not come with a calculated outer limit. It comes with an open account. It comes with a return trip. It comes with the understanding that the person you knelt beside in the dust yesterday is still a person you are responsible to today and tomorrow, for as long as the need exists and you have something to offer. Think about the people in your life who are in the middle of a long crisis, not an acute emergency that demands immediate response. Those are actually easier because the urgency is visible and the action is obvious. The long crises are harder. The friend who is 18 months into a depression and hasn't gotten better yet. The family member whose marriage fell apart 2 years ago and is still struggling to find their footing. The colleague dealing with a slow, grinding financial disaster that doesn't have a clean resolution date. These situations are the whatever more it takes situations. They are the places where the initial burst of compassion has been used up, and the sustained commitment is the only thing that remains. Unglamorous, unscheduled, unacknowledged by anyone, quietly expensive in time and energy and emotional presence. The Samaritan paid and promised and left. And when he came back down that road, he stopped at the inn, not because the law required it, not because anyone would have known if he hadn't, because he had made a promise. And the promise was the love made concrete, made contractual, made real in the most practical way possible, with money on the table and a man's word. Jesus told this parable in response to a question, and the question itself is one of the most honest and revealing things in the entire exchange. A lawyer, a scholar of the religious law, had stood up to test Jesus, and when Jesus turned the question back to him, the lawyer had answered correctly. Love God with everything you have, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Luke records, wanting to justify himself, he asked, and who is my neighbor? That phrase, wanting to justify himself, is one of the most transparent moments in the Gospels. The man was not asking out of genuine theological curiosity. He was not puzzled by the concept of neighbor. He was looking for a boundary. He wanted Jesus to give him a definition of neighbor that was narrow enough to make his current practice of love sufficient. He wanted confirmation that the people he was already loving, the ones within his community, his class, his religion, his acceptable social circle, were in fact the full extent of what the commandment required. He wanted to be told, you're doing enough. You're in compliance. The category is smaller than you feared, and you already fit inside it. Jesus responded with a story. And when the story was over, he did something that changed the entire architecture of the conversation with a single rhetorical move. He didn't answer the lawyer's question. He replaced. The lawyer had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" meaning, who qualifies as the object of my obligation. Jesus finished the story and asked, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The question flipped completely. Not who is my neighbor, but who was a neighbor to him. Not who do I have an obligation toward, but what kind of person am I in relation to those around me? This is one of the most significant theological pivots in the entire New Testament. And it is easy to miss because the difference seems subtle. But the difference is everything. The lawyer's question positioned him as the agent evaluating others for neighborhood status, deciding who makes the cut, who receives the benefit of his love, who is in and who is out, based on some criterion he wanted Jesus to define. Jesus' question positioned the lawyer as the one being evaluated, not asking who qualifies, but asking who he himself has been willing to become in relation to the needs around him. The question moved from definition to character, from legal qualification to personal transformation. The lawyer answered, correctly again, "The one who had mercy on him." He couldn't bring himself to say, "the Samaritan." The cultural weight of the word was too heavy, even here, even in the moment of being completely exposed by the story. He abstracted it to a function, the one who showed mercy. And Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Not go and categorize the people around you correctly. Not go and define your terms with greater precision. Not go and construct a more theologically rigorous framework for neighbor love. Go and do what he did. There's a profound implication in the redirection of the question that we need to sit with carefully. The lawyer came to Jesus wanting to know the limits of his obligation. He wanted a smaller circle. Jesus drew a larger one. The lawyer was asking, who is close enough to count? Jesus answered, "Go be close to whoever needs you." The lawyer was asking, who qualifies for my love? Jesus answered, "Your love is what qualifies you." The distinction between who is my neighbor and who am I being a neighbor to might sound like wordplay, but it is the difference between a religion of correct categories and a faith of active, embodied, costly love. In the deeply divided landscape of modern America, politically, racially, culturally, economically, Jesus' reframing of the question is more urgently needed than it has perhaps ever been in this country's history. We have become extraordinarily sophisticated at sorting people into categories: neighbor and not neighbor, worthy and unworthy, deserving and not deserving of our compassion and resources and proximity. We have our circles, carefully maintained, and we are genuinely loving within them. And we have our others, the people on the other side of various walls, toward whom we feel justified in our distance, because they are, by our best reasoning, not really our neighbors in the relevant sense. Jesus says, go be a neighbor. Stop asking who qualifies. Stop drawing the line. Get on the road, and when you find the person in the dirt, kneel down. The neighbor is not the person who meets your criteria. The neighbor is the person you become when you stop. Jesus ended the story with a command, not a suggestion, not an encouragement, not a personal recommendation calibrated to individual circumstances. A command. Go and do likewise. Two words in English, poreo and poie in Greek, that together constitute one of the most direct, unambiguous, behaviorally specific instructions Jesus ever gave to anyone. Not consider doing something similar in spirit. Not apply the principle as the Spirit leads. Go. Do. Likewise, the same thing. The thing the Samaritan did. The stopping, the kneeling, the oil and wine, the torn clothing, the donkey, the inn, the 2 denarii, the open account, the promise to return. That thing. Do it. This command was addressed first to the lawyer who had been looking for the minimum. Jesus gave him the maximum instead. But through the text, across 2,000 years of reading and preaching and hearing, the command has been addressed to every person who has ever encountered this story, which means it is addressed to you right now, in this moment. Go and do likewise. Not when it's convenient, not when it fits the budget, not when the person in the road is someone you already know and like and feel comfortable with. When you come down the road and find the wounded man there, that is when. That is the command. There is a word that appears earlier in the passage that deserves one final, careful examination. When the Samaritan sees the wounded man and has compassion, Luke uses that gut-level Greek word splagnizomai, the same word used of Jesus when he looked at the crowds, when he healed the sick, when he raised the widow's son. The compassion that moves in the bowels and the deepest interior of the self, where something shifts before the mind has had time to form a strategy. Jesus describes the Samaritan with this word intentionally. He is painting a picture of what the inside of a person looks like when they have been transformed by real love. Not just the behavior, but the source of the behavior. Not just the stopping, but the quality of being that makes the stopping instinctive rather than calculated. This is what Christian formation is ultimately for. Not the accumulation of correct doctrine, though doctrine matters. Not the performance of religious rituals, though ritual has its place. The transformation of the interior, the renovation of the gut, so that when you encounter human suffering, your first response is not a risk assessment or a theological calculation or a consideration of your schedule. Your first response is movement toward the need. You are the kind of person who stops because you have been shaped by the God who stopped for you on the way to Calvary when you were the one in the road, bleeding, stripped, unable to help yourself. Because that is the truth behind the parable that Jesus does not say explicitly, but that the whole of Scripture makes undeniable. We are not naturally the Samaritan. Left to ourselves with our schedules and our categories and our very reasonable justifications, we are far more like the priest and the Levite than we want to admit. We are people who see and cross to the other side. We are people who almost stop and then don't. We are people who have constructed sophisticated frameworks for why our specific version of passing by is actually the responsible, the appropriate, the theologically defensible choice. We were the man in the road, and Jesus stopped. He came down into the dust of our condition, stripped of the comfort and glory of heaven, and he knelt beside us in the specific dirt of our specific ruin. And he treated our wounds with what he had, and he carried us to a place of safety. At a cost he was the only one who could have paid. He did not cross to the other side. He crossed every boundary that separated God from humanity and got down to where we were. The love of God toward us is the Samaritan's love, writ across the whole of history in the blood of the cross. And having received that love, having been found in the road and lifted and healed and carried, Jesus says to us now, go. Go and do the thing that was done for you. Let what happened to you in the road become what you do on the road. Let the mercy that found you become the mercy you extend. Stop for the colleague, the neighbor, the stranger, the person whose political lawn sign makes you uncomfortable, the person whose life choices you don't understand, the person who would probably not stop for you. Stop. Kneel. Bring the oil and the wine. Stay through the night. Come back. The world is not waiting for a better argument about who qualifies as a neighbor. The world is full of people in the road, waiting for someone to stop. The question Jesus is asking you today is not theological. It is physical, immediate, and embarrassingly practical. Someone in your life is in the road right now. You know who it is. The question is not whether they count as your neighbor. The question is whether you are going to be one.